Hey everyone, and welcome to 121 Movie Catch Up. I am Peter, and this is a show that I have apparently been doing on a fairly regular basis recently, where I take all the movies I watched that weren't for review purposes over the last couple of weeks and sit down and do some mini reviews over the course of half an hour or so, and just kind of catch up on what I've been watching and stuff that I've not talked about anywhere else. So, first movie I watched in the last couple of weeks was Fighting with My Family, which is a 2019 film. It came out this year. It is directed by Stephen Merchant, of all people, which is one of the weirdest details about this movie. He's also got a small role in the movie, but it stars Florence Pugh as WWE wrestler Paige, and it's kind of her story about getting to the company and becoming a star. And she comes from this wrestling family in the movie, played by Nick Frost and Lena Headey, and it's this kind of quirky family drama comedy that's also about getting into wrestling and making the big time, as it were. And what's interesting about this film is that even though there's definitely been other movies based on true stories that I have had a good idea of what the real story was, this is one where, not the whole thing, like all the stuff before she gets to the company, I didn't really know anything about that. But, I was watching a lot of this stuff when it happened on TV. So I think one of the weird complaints for me about this movie is that because I watched how things happened on TV, when they make choices in this film to condense it or to change it for dramatic purposes, it irked me a little bit more than it usually does, because I'm like, wait, no, I watched this. I watched this with millions of people. We all saw how this happened. Because it definitely alters things here or there for the sake of fitting it all in the movie. And that said, though, it is actually a really decent little movie. It's got a good cast for a start. Florence Pugh is really good. The Rock's in there playing himself. And they also changed the timeline of the film, because I think they kind of move it to like more towards present day. Not that it was that long ago all this stuff happened. But the film is a lot of heart. I think that's the big thing that really makes it work compared to what you may be expecting going into it. If you're expecting just this dumb comedy about wrestling and whatever, but it has a lot of heart about Paige trying to fitting in with these other wrestlers who are there. One of the big plot points of the film is that she's a trained wrestler. She's grew up in a wrestling family, and it's been her life to learn to do this properly and to actually be an in-ring worker. Whereas a lot of the other ladies who go to NXT, which is the development sort of early stage of the company that you go to, they're ex-supermodels or ex-cheerleaders, or they're all good-looking model types, as opposed to people who can actually wrestle, and that becomes a source of conflict for her. She can't quite fit in the same ways. She feels like this odd duckling in amongst a different type of person, and that's a big part of the film. It's a big part of the heart of the film, is trying to kind of overcome that and succeed despite all of those problems, and also the doubts that go along with that, and also the added drama of her brother, who equally dreamed of getting this opportunity but is not accepted. And that's not a spoiler, that's in the trailer, that he applies and goes to the tryout with her, and he fails. He is not picked, and that becomes a source of drama as well. And he's actually definitely the second main character of the film. Like, we have two main characters in the sense. It's definitely more Paige's movie. She's definitely the main protagonist, but his story is definitely the intentional counterbalance to her plot. And he's the one who has his own arc as well through it as well, and him dealing with her being successful and getting these opportunities and him not being. So there's a lot in there about dealing with both success and failure and the struggles that come with both, and everything in between. Now, it's based loosely on the documentary, which had the same title, I believe, which was in the UK a few years ago. I do believe that documentary was a lot more brutally honest about the company WWE, which this movie does not have at all. There is nothing in this movie that criticizes that company or anything it does, or in any way makes them look bad. Also, I didn't even mention Vince Vaughn. Vince Vaughn's like the trainer guy in here, because one of the big things that it changes from the real story is that NXT, it's become more so even since then, but at the time when Paige debuted on the main show on Monday Night Raw, NXT was already at a point where it was something people watched and people already knew who everyone was that was on it. So when Paige arrived on the main show, she was cheered because the fans who were there the night after WrestleMania knew who she was, because these were the people who would know that. Whereas the movie doesn't do that. The movie doesn't treat it like that. The movie treats it like no one knows who she is and she's going to have to win them over. But she's already done that in real life by that point. So that was like the big thing that was sort of different. And I don't feel like that's much of a spoiler, even, because of course she gets there. This movie is about someone's story of getting to WWE. We know she gets there, even if you didn't see it yourself. That's what the point of this story is that, hey, that's a movie about that WWE wrestler, so you know she's going to get there by the end of the film. But to its credit, I don't think it suffers from you knowing at least kind of how it ends, because the heart in the moment where it ends is actually really well achieved and earned over the course of the film. So as a result, it's actually pretty solid, and I would happily hand this a 7.5. I don't think it quite hits great. Maybe it'll go up for me if I ever see it again. But it's got a really strong cast. It's got a good heart. It is laugh out loud funny in a few places. The clash between Nick Frost and Lena Headey's, like, wrestler parents, and then the brother character. He's got like a new wife or girlfriend, and they meet his parents, and that's Stephen Merchant, and they're like these posh parents, and the way they clash leads to a lot of laughs. No, it's pretty funny, and obviously it's one that if you're into wrestling in any way, you roughly know the ins and outs of it. You'll laugh at them sort of dealing with it, but I think it equally works if you're not. I think if you don't know anything about wrestling, the human story that's in there works equally as well. And if anything, maybe all the inconsistencies with real life won't bother you, because you won't know that there's something wrong, or you won't notice that, like, whereas I'm like, this isn't accurate. I remember this thing. But that's solid. It's probably more solid than you would think a movie about what this is would be. And how weird is it how many like wrestling like movies and TV shows there have been recently? We have Glow on Netflix, which is really good, and I'm still reviewing season 3 of that. You have the upcoming biopic with Chris Hemsworth playing Hulk Hogan. Like, there's a lot of these things popping up around the place, which is interesting. Obviously, The Wrestler with Mickey Rourke was a good 10 years ago now, but that's a really good movie still. But yeah, that's fine with my family. Next up, I finally got to see Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, obviously another new release for the year. Not that old comparatively. The reason why I'm doing this on this show is because I got this a good 3 weeks later than it was originally released, and because of that, it didn't work out for review purposes. So, and I was tempted to do a solo review, but again, most people had already had it for 3 weeks. It didn't feel as worth the commitment to sitting down and talking about it for as long as that. But I am a Tarantino fan. I was looking forward to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and was curious to see how I'd feel about it. And the movie is nearly 3 hours long. It is a long-ass movie. It's 2 hours and 40-something minutes. So the movie is about Leonardo DiCaprio, who plays this aging actor who's just kind of over his prime, kind of at the age that Leonardo DiCaprio is. He's starting to be passed over, and obviously it's set in 1969. I mean, long before we had a title for this movie, it was just referred to as the 1969 movie that Tarantino's doing. Brad Pitt plays his stuntman, although he's really become more of a gopher because he didn't really do stunts for him anymore. And the movie is largely about this changing of eras in Hollywood, and you got Margot Robbie as Sharon Tate, and obviously one of the big things that's sort of seeded throughout the film that's maybe building up to is the Manson murders. And what's interesting is that I had just seen the Mindhunter episode that focused on Manson like 2 days before I went to see this movie, and that was a really interesting experience because there was some little references that I got in the movie that I would never have got if I hadn't just seen that Mindhunter video episode, you know what I mean? So, no, the movie's really good. The movie's really good. It's not Tarantino's best, and I think one of the reasons why it's not his best is because it's a very laid back movie. There's very little drive for the first well, probably honestly, really the whole movie. Like, the movie is very slice of life, like just day in the life of these people. And then the ending kind of recontextualizes the whole thing as to what it's actually trying to say. And I actually did like that. I might even do a slight spoiler section for this. I should have probably done this one last so that I could do that, but I won't do it yet. But Performances are very good. I think one of the things that I like the most about seeing a Tarantino movie in 2019 is that, so many movies, even movies I like, I loved Endgame. Endgame was a blast, right? It was this big culmination to 10 years of superhero movies. But Endgame does not look like a good movie. In the sense that visually it just looks kind of ho-hum. The CG wasn't amazing. It's very kind of the Disney product or the Marvel product just getting put out. There's not much of a filmmaker's voice in the film, right? And I think what I really like about a Tarantino movie, and what I like about a lot of low budget movies and indie films, is that this feels like a really sort of classically done movie. It's shot in film. It's got all these big stars, and a lot of attention is played to a lot of things, and it has kind of a message. It has something that it's trying to say, and you can feel Tarantino's voice, whether it's because of the long shots or the dialogue. Although his dialogue didn't feel as Tarantino-y as normal. Or whether it's because all the feet that are in your face, and this movie has the most feet that any Tarantino movie's ever had. Although it's still not Wiggle Your Big Toe from Kill Bill, because that's fantastic. And there's a lot of Kurt Russell pops up in a role, and Al Pacino pops up in a small role, and there's a lot of that. Margaret Qualley's in there in a fairly, probably one of the bigger supporting roles, which is really nice. And there's a lot of other names that pop up. The film is very funny. It has a lot of humor in it. It has a lot of dark humor, and it's just kind of a nice kind of character study. I will say, as I was watching it, I was sort of thinking about 90 minutes into it, I'm like, man, this movie has very little drive. As I said, there's very little. If you think about any other movie that he's done, there's always kind of this drive of what the film's about. That is, whether it's tension, whether it's Django Unchained, where it's this they've got this quest that they're on, or Hateful Eight, they're in this tense situation, and it's about trying to survive and figure out who the enemies are and who you can trust. This movie doesn't have any of that. This movie's very just, and obviously we know the Manson family are a potential threat. And there's very little of Manson himself. I was expecting more of him. He's in one or two scenes, and he doesn't really do a whole lot. But yeah, so I want to just give a spoiler warning here for a second. Just skip ahead. There'll be timestamps in the description for the next movie. So if you want to skip ahead to the next movie, you can do that. But I wanted to just mention the ending, and because I think what makes this movie good, to me, what really kind of puts the bow on it, that makes it feel like, okay, I got a complete experience, is the ending and what it does. And it does that thing. So spoilers here. It does the thing that it kind of did in Inglourious Bastards, where it kind of rewrites history. And instead of the Manson family, killing Sharon Tate, when they try and kill Brad Pitt and DiCaprio, Brad Pitt fights back and violently, brutalizes them and kills the Manson family members. And then the final one's torched with a flamethrower by Leonardo DiCaprio, which was set up earlier on, and it was a really funny setup for that, actually. Can you do anything about this heat? It's a flamethrower, Rick. No, really good. And the movie kind of ends with Leo finally going to meet Sharon Tate, who he's kind of commented on earlier on that he's not had a chance to meet yet. And if he meets the neighbors, because it's Roman Polanski lives there, maybe he'll get to be in a Polanski film. Because the whole film's about him kind of falling out of the big roles, and he has to go to Italy to star in some Italian westerns, and he's not really proud or happy about that. And what this movie ultimately is about in the end is the idea that we can transition from one era to the next. Because, in history, this event was kind of seen as the end of traditional Hollywood. It was seen as the end of the Summer of Love. And it was this violent, brutal end that had to kind of murder the old so that the new could be birthed afterwards, this new wave of filmmakers and cinema. And I think this movie, the ultimate kind of thought behind it, this even the title's kind of this fairy tale title, right, is the idea that maybe we could have transitioned peacefully between those things. Maybe they can coexist. Maybe the aging actor can become friends with Sharon Tate, and they can move forward, and she gets to continue. And it's this hopeful ending of this doesn't have to be the end of something, that we can transition between these periods in a really kind of harmonious way. And I actually like the ending. I enjoyed the movie, but the ending really gave it a point to me. I was like, oh, this is what this movie really is. It's this idea of this festering danger of the Manson family are bubbling under the surface throughout the film, as we see Rick struggle, DiCaprio's character, with his career seemingly coming to an end, but he still cares about filmmaking. He's still passionate about it. He cares about it, and he gets really proud when the little girl actress tells him he did a good job and it's the best acting she ever saw, and it's that maybe he does still have that fight left in him. And this ending is this hopeful kind of, we can transition between generations. We can, old and new cinema can be together and both thrive and exist. And, even just at this point in his career where Tarantino's saying that he's going to make one more movie and retire, it feels, even the whole idea of like hanging your hat up after this career, it feels very personal to Tarantino. So, not my favourite film by him, but I think that it said a lot of great things ultimately by the end of it, and it felt like a really nice personal film where the director had something to say, and I don't get that enough in the movies these days. I wish I got that more, so I will praise it for that. As for ratings, I'll definitely give it a solid 8 out of 10. It might rise on repeat viewings, but it's definitely well worth seeing if you still can see it, or see it when it comes to home video. But that's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. So moving on to Roadgames. This is so we're doing an older movie now. This is from 1981. This is Richard Franklin directed, who funnily enough also directed Psycho 2, which I actually watched a week maybe 2 weeks before I watched this for Screams. You've not seen that review yet because it's part of the Octoberthon. Look forward to it next month. But Roadgames was a movie I actually heard about completely independent of Psycho 2. I heard about it on a podcast. I'd heard it just described as Rear Window meets Duel, and I could not ignore that description because I'm into that idea. And it's a movie that's actually set in Australia. It stars Stacy Keach, who you might know his face. He's not like a huge actor. He was on an episode of Brooklyn Nine-Nine back in season 1 or 2. Probably seen him in a couple of things. But you also have Jamie Lee Curtis in there. So this is 1981. This is the same year as Halloween 2, maybe the year before Halloween 2. So it's right around that period when she was in a slasher boom. And it's not quite a horror movie. I'd say it's more of a thriller. But it's basically, so it's about a trucker. Stacy Keach plays this trucker who is driving across Australia from somewhere to Perth. I can't remember where he started, but he's off to Perth. He's a trucker, so he's got all these frozen cow carcasses in the back of the truck, and it's just this long truck movie. And there's something that he sees at the start that looks kind of suspicious, like this guy who's been driving. It looks like, as the audience, we jump to it looks like he's murdered someone. He doesn't jump to that. And one of the things I like about this movie, actually, is that the progression of him believing that someone that he keeps seeing on the road, this car, this van that he keeps seeing on the road, combined with the news reports over the radio of hitchhikers going missing and turning up dead, and they're all, it's all women hitchhikers, it's all these, these sexual crimes, and the progression for which he sort of begins to, because at first when he starts thinking about it, he starts theorizing about, oh, maybe it's this guy I've seen a couple of suspicious moments with, maybe it's him that's doing this. It's played like he's just kind of doing it for fun, like he's not seriously considering that he's actually on the tail of the killer. And the way it progresses, where it's kind of fun, but then it's like, oh, maybe seriously, maybe something is, and then oh, maybe I'm just crazy, and then he's convinced, but he's he's kind of, and then he looks kind of crazy because it turns out not to be what he thought, or something. Like, the way that progresses for me felt very natural in a way that didn't feel like too ridiculous as a movie. I'm not saying there's no leaps in logic at any point, but I think for the most part, he didn't just, I like how long the movie went before he was actually really believing that something might be happening. Whether or not he's right, I won't spoil, because I think that's really part of the movie, is this the killer that he's chasing? Jamie Lee Curtis plays a hitchhiker that, despite the fact that he doesn't want to pick anyone up, he eventually does. And she kind of gets in on it, which is really what makes me think of Rear Window, because it's the idea that he's, even though he's in a moving truck, the idea that he's sitting in a seat that he can't really move from because he's in the truck, but he witnesses some things that suggest there might be a crime. And Jamie Lee Curtis, the hitchhiker, kind of almost becomes the Grace Kelly of the movie, where she's with him and hears what he has to say and tries to help him and that kind of thing. And the movie, is pretty solid. I actually had a lot of fun with this one. I think Keach is very likable in the role. Jamie Lee Curtis is likable. There's some great suspenseful scenes throughout. It kind of does a really neat job of like building up a couple of other cars on the road as supporting characters that you kind of see once in a while. Even if that's unrealistic, it doesn't really matter. It's just kind of fun. And yeah, like there's some fun moments. The final like 15-20 minutes is just kind of this race against the clock, this car chase, and the threat escalates at a certain point, and it's just a really fun thriller. And it's a movie that I've never heard talked about before. I'd heard about it for the first time. I thought it was interesting sounding, and went and sought it out. And it's not easy to find. At least I didn't think it was easy to find. But if you can get a hold of it, I would highly recommend Roadgames. If you like the sound of what I've said in this, and accept some of the time period sort of tropes that it might have, I think you could get really into it. This is exactly the sort of simple premise that I really love when it's done well, and I think it's fairly well shot, and has a nice bit of atmosphere in it. And Psycho 2, likewise, is a pretty solid movie. So maybe I should check out more of Richard Franklin's stuff. What else has he done? I'm curious. What's he known for? Cloak and Dagger, Patrick, Link. I've not heard of any of these movies. Maybe some of these are good. FX2. Is there an FX one? I don't know. But no, intriguing. Very intriguing. So Roadgames is very, very good. I'd give it... I'm really tempted to give it the 8. I really am. But I'm going to go with the 7.5 again, and it might go up on repeat viewings. And it's sort of a movie that I would want to watch again. It's sort of a movie that I find very comforting to watch, actually, in a really weird way. But yeah, it's, if you want something that fits that Rear Window kind of vibe, but with a different kind of twist on it, I think you'll get something out of Roadgames. Obviously, it's no Rear Window. Rear Window's a 10. It's Hitchcock. But no, Roadgames. Check it out. So that takes me on to Anaconda from 1997, which I'd never seen before. This was a movie I watched on stream. In fact, the last 2 movies that I'm going to talk about were movies that I watched on stream with some of you guys, on some of the random late streams that I do. So Anaconda is a movie about a giant snake in the Amazon. Came out in 1997, directed by Louis Uoza. Oh, no, Uoza. I learned from Cursor La Llorona what 2 L's mean. So I'm going to, given the name, I'm going to assume this is a Spanish name. And I'm going to say Uoza. I'm probably still butchering it, admittedly. So yeah, this has got Jennifer Lopez, who can't act, Ice Cube, who just plays Ice Cube, and Jon Voight, who is doing some weird accent that I can't even fathom what he's trying to do, and plays this very intense hunter character who's constantly staring like a pervert to everyone around, especially the women on board on the little boat. So they kind of find him stranded, and then they end up just sort of keeping him with them. But he gets them into so much trouble. And there's some, obviously, deaths and various things. This movie's really mediocre. I'll just say it's bad. It's a bad movie. There's 1 or 2 funny death scenes. That's what it's got going for it. I think the big problem with it is, despite the fact that it has this cast of like some interesting names, you got Eric Stoltz in there, you got Owen Wilson in there, Danny Trejo's in a small role. The problem with it is that the characters are very, very dull. They're very uninteresting in a very kind of late 90s, early 2000s kind of way. They feel like really forced cliches in a way that doesn't feel natural. You have actors playing roles that don't feel that they fit the roles, but they're trying really hard to make them be that character, and it all comes off as very disjointed. It's very hard to get into any of them. Any of the relationships that we're supposed to like buy into between the pairs don't really work. They're just kind of tedious to watch. And kind of soulless. And then you get to the actual snake stuff, which takes a while to really get going. There's a couple of fun moments in the deaths, but ultimately the snake's not as fun as I thought it would be. I really thought that there would be more laugh out loud moments, which is why I watched it. I was hoping for some goofy B-movie stuff, and it ended up being a really neutered Hollywood B-movie, where it's not crazy enough to actually do any of the things that I like about B-movies. It's too mainstream, it's too Hollywood studio produced to do the things that I want it to do. It just feels very hollow as a result. So this is an easy like 3 out of 10 for me. Jon Voight overacting like a menace is easily the highlight. I was laughing more at John Voight than I was anything else in this movie. That is for sure. So, and then that takes us on to the final movie that I watched in the last couple of weeks for the purpose of this show. And that is a 47 Meters Down, which was another creature feature. Came out in 2017 by Johannes Roberts as the director. So again, I watched this on stream, and I mean, some of these movies that we watch on stream are just because they happen to be on Netflix or Amazon Prime or whatever, so more people can join in. But the sequel of this is coming out soon, actually. But I can enjoy a shark movie. I actually had a decent amount of fun with The Shallows for what it was, and obviously Jaws is a classic that everyone likes. I happen to kind of love Deep Blue Sea. So, but that's kind of it. I've not actually seen any of the Jaws sequels. I'm sure that's something we'll do at some point on one of the review shows for fun. Because I've heard great things about Jaws 3D. I've heard great things about that movie. But 47 Meters Down is about two sisters who go in a shark cage, but there's a problem and the shark cage drops to the 47 meter mark. And they're trapped down there and trying to communicate with the surface and get back up. And obviously there's sharks swirling around, and the danger awaits, essentially. So this movie is very down the middle mediocre to me. There's a couple of things I like. One of the things that I'd praise about this is that it makes the very smart choice is to, once the girls go into the water, we never cut to the surface again when they're down there. We never cut back up to the boat with the guys who have loaded them in or freaking out. Eventually they talk to them over the communications. So we hear glimpses of them, but it treats it almost found footage-esque, where we don't ever cut up there and see what's going on. And I think that's a smart choice. And I think that's one of the things that found footage, why found footage works when it does work, is that element to it, where you just don't cut to the other thing. So it makes you feel very confined and personal with the characters you're following. But as this movie shows, and as many movies have shown over the years, you don't actually have to be found footage to do that. You can just choose not to cut to the other thing. You can choose to just stay focused on the characters in a traditional filmmaking sense. So while I'm not saying this movie should be praised for it, because it's not exactly a new idea, I appreciated the restraint. I thought, okay, that's a good direction choice, is you're not cutting back up to the boat. Cool. And there's one or two, fun moments. I think the general concept of the movie I like, and the idea that they have this safe, cage that's at the bottom of the seabed, but they have to leave it to do certain things. They have to leave it and go up to try and get a signal to talk to the people on the boat. They have to leave it to go and get stuff that's been dropped down to them or whatever. And I always like that setup in a horror movie. I love the idea of the safe room, the safe space. But the characters do have to go outside of it to accomplish things. So there's a lot of leaving and coming back, and the danger that goes with that. I always love that general setup, and it's something a lot of movies have done. And I've never seen it quite done like this, completely underwater whilst they're on breather tanks, and they've got a time limit. Obviously there's a ticking time clock element to this because they're running out of air and so on and so on. So I like that kind of element to it. I think the movie suffers though from a few things. The CG is not that great. I feel like the sharks never really feel like a character in the movie, and that might sound strange, but even The Shallows does this thing where you feel like it becomes the villain of the movie, it feels like the antagonist. It never really feels like that in this movie. It feels more just like there's always sharks around, and it never really have much of a personality. And again, I know that sounds weird, but most shark movies, the shark kind of has a personality. You watch Jaws, it feels like it's hunting them. It feels vicious. Deep Blue Sea, to a less extent, but there's so much shark stuff in that movie. Whereas in this movie, it almost felt like the shark stuff was just kind of there because that's what the threat is, and there wasn't really much thought into this make the sharks feel, like a presence in the same way. The first time a shark appears in any capacity is just such a nothing moment. That's it doesn't feel like a big deal, and that just kind of feels the same throughout the rest of it. There's no build up to the sharks. It's kind of odd. The characters are kind of rough as well, especially one of the sisters, but neither of them are particularly interesting. I don't know how to describe this. I tried doing this when I was watching it on stream, but the way I would kind of describe the characters if I'm trying to in movies like this is that they want it to take itself. They want the movie to be taken seriously, so they try to give us characters who feel closer to realistic than, say, stereotypes or archetypes that you get in a lot of horror movies. And while I understand that, the problem is that if the writing and the performances and whatnot, but especially the writing, isn't there to actually make interesting characters, then it actually comes off way worse than having the archetypes. Because at least when you have the archetypes, they're kind of simple and fun and can be funny, or they can be whatever, because they're just kind of these caricatures almost, right? Like, that's not necessarily a problem in a slasher movie or something like that when we're watching a fun B movie. The problem with a lot of horror movies from, say, post 2000 that I've noticed do this, and this one falls into this, is that it wants it to be taken seriously, but it never really has the filmmaking to elevate it above what it really is, and that is a B movie. It's not Jaws. Like, Jaws elevated the idea of a shark hunting people into a great piece of filmmaking, and it feels like an A movie. Whereas you watch this movie, and it's like, no, this is a B movie. It should probably not be taking itself so seriously. It should probably be trying to have a bit more fun with what it's doing. And I'm not saying it has to make jokes about it or try not to be tense when it's in the actual shark-infested parts of the movie, but the characters should probably be a bit more likable and fun. As it is, they're very dry. They're just like, I think one of the big warning signs for me in a movie like this, and we just had Wolf Creek on Screams, and that had the same problem, is any horror movie or movie that's kind of horror, that one of the ways that you try and make me like the characters at the start of the movie, or give me information and let me get to know the characters, if your method for that is a montage of them getting drunk at a party or a club, I immediately worry about them, because I almost always hate those characters. Almost always hate those characters. There's something about it just feels so lazy and bland. It's like, say, look, they're normal, 20-somethings who drink and party. Boring. And again, like, you go back to, like, the other movies that I was, like, thinking about. If you think about, like, slasher movies and movies with, like, characters that are a bit more goofy and have these traits that are more defined, you can go into goofy territory, but sometimes you don't, and sometimes you just give them enough that they feel like movie characters and they feel memorable because of that. Whereas there's nothing memorable about these two characters. They are nothing. And they try and play the emotion, as the movie goes on. The one sister's trying to, like, tell the other sister she has to, like, find the strength and not be scared and yada yada yada. I'm all for good drama in a horror movie if the script is good enough to tie the drama and use the horror as a metaphor for the drama. I love that when it's done well. I really do. But some movies just aren't up to that quality, and I think this is a movie that suffers from that. So it's taking itself a bit too seriously. The stuff in the water, the actual, like, shark attack stuff and violence and stuff, is kind of mediocre because A, CG, and B, it's not shot in the most interesting way possible. Sometimes the shark just kind of swoops past or whatever. So it's never silly enough to really love, but it's also never well made enough to make the serious stuff, like, really land. And as a result, it kind of ends up being like a 4 out of 10 kind of range. Yeah, something in that range. 4 out of 10. Maybe the sequel will be better. I don't know. Same director though, so I wouldn't count on it. But there you go. So that is the movies that I've watched in the last couple of weeks that weren't for review purposes. Obviously, I have watched a ton. I watched like 3 movies yesterday. I've got 3 Screams reviews to record this weekend. Busy. A lot of movie stuff being done. Octoberthon's going to be nuts. If you don't know what Octoberthon is, it is me and Tim for Screams After Midnight, which is a horror movie podcast. It's kind of like this, but it's me and Tim, and we spend, like, anything from 30 minutes to over an hour on one movie as an episode. And, in October, we try and do tons of episodes. This year, we're going to try and hit 31 episodes for 31 days. Really a big deal. A few of them are going to be exclusive to Patreon, and it's worth mentioning that because patreon.com/MailFuzzTV is how we are supported primarily, and how you can keep all the content coming and get to vote on certain movie shows, get some bonuses and exclusives for as little as $1 per month. So go over and have a look and see if it tickles your fancy and you want to, like, help support all the content that comes from us. So go do that. You can also, of course, like, subscribe, let me know what you thought of the movies and the movies that I've talked about in the comments, and you can go over and check out the Twitter at mailed_fuzz. You can get me on Twitter specifically at Wibble89, and that's me. So thank you very much for watching. I always appreciate it. Keep watching movies, guys, and if you can get it, it's always nice to have diplomatic immunity.